The house on Decker Road had been mine for 11 years before I noticed that my work partner's face was shifting. Not metaphorically. Not in the way people say someone looks different when they're tired or sick. I mean, the bones under Marcus Weber's skin were migrating a 16th of an inch at a time, 3 nights running, toward a configuration I had seen before, toward a face that belonged to a man buried in Hillcrest Memorial since 2019. I need to explain why I'm certain. I need to explain the measurements, because I took them. I'm a journeyman lineman. I measure things for a living. SAG calculations, pole-to-pole span, conductor clearance. I can estimate distance to within 2 inches at 40 feet. When I tell you Marcus's left orbital socket sat 3 millimeters lower on Thursday morning than it had on Monday, I am not guessing. I am telling you what I observed with the same eyes I used to gauge energized line clearance at 69 kilovolts. This was last October. Late October, the week before Halloween, which afterward felt less like coincidence and more like the worst kind of joke. We were running a reconductor job on the 12.5 kilovolt distribution line that feeds the east side of Carver, Washington. Population maybe 2,200. Former mill town. The Weyerhaeuser operation closed in 2014, and half the commercial district went with it. But people stayed because people always stay in places like that. The mountains hold them. The rain makes everything so green it hurts, and the green makes leaving feel like betrayal. Marcus and I had been climbing together for 4 years. That's a word linemen use. Climbing means your regular partner, the guy in the bucket next to you, or belayed on the pole below. You trust your climber more than your spouse in some ways, because if he doesn't ground that conductor before you touch it, you die. Simple as that. 4 years. I knew his face the way I knew my own truck dashboard. Every crease, the scar on his right eyebrow from the time a hot stick slipped, the slightly crooked bridge of his nose. I had memorized Marcus's face without trying. The way you memorize anything you look at every day for 1,400 shifts. We were staying at the Briar Motor Lodge on the south end of Carver. The utility puts us up when a job runs more than 40 miles from the service center. Briar Motor Lodge. 12 rooms, gravel lot, a vending machine from maybe 2003 that still somehow had Mountain Dew. Our rooms were side by side, 7 and 8. With a shared wall thin enough that I could hear Marcus set his alarm every night at 8:45 p.m. He was always early to bed. Said his grandfather told him a man's best thinking happens before 5 a.m., and I never argued, because he was usually right about most things. Monday, the job started clean. Pulled the old 336 ACSR off the east span between poles 47 and 52, working the dead-end structures first. That section runs along a frontage road that borders what the locals call the Cobb Timber, which is about 900 acres of second-growth Doug fir and red cedar that Weyerhaeuser sold off to a private holding company when they pulled out. Nobody logs it anymore. Nobody does anything with it. The trees just grow, and the road runs along their edge like a hem. I mentioned the timber because Marcus kept looking at it. Not glancing, looking. Standing in the bucket at 32 feet, hot stick in hand, head turned east toward those trees instead of at the conductor he was supposed to be rigging. I called him on it over the headset. "Weber, you planning to energize that span or photograph it?" He turned back, smiled. Same Marcus smile, slightly lopsided, right side higher than left. "Sorry. Thought I saw someone in there." "In the timber?" "Edge of it, just standing there." I looked. The tree line sat maybe 80 feet from the road, a wall of trunks going from green to black within 10 yards of depth. October light was flat and gray. I didn't see anyone. "Probably a hunter," I said. "Bow season." "Yeah, probably." We finished the pull, resagged the new conductor to specs, 16 inches at midspan at 60 degrees, and knocked off at 340. Early for us. Marcus said he wanted to grab food and turn in. I offered to drive us to the diner on Route 9, but he said he wasn't that hungry. Just wanted something from the gas station in his room. That night, I heard him set his alarm at 8:45 through the wall. Normal. But at 2:17 a.m., I heard his door open and close. Not slam. Just the click of the latch and the scrape of his boots on the concrete walkway outside. I know the time because I checked my phone when the sound woke me. I'm a light sleeper. 30 years on cruise where a call-out can come at any hour does that. I didn't get up. Figured he was going to his truck for something or hitting the bathroom down the hall. But I didn't hear him come back. In the morning, he was at the truck at 6, like always. Coffee in his left hand, Carhartt jacket zipped to the sternum, even though it was only about 43 degrees. Not that cold for late October in the foothills. I almost didn't notice. Almost. But when he turned to hand me the tailboard clipboard for our morning job briefing, something in my chest seized. Just for a second, like a muscle spasm behind my ribs. His face was the same face. Marcus Weber. Brown eyes, the scar, the crooked nose. But something about the spacing was wrong. The distance between his eyes and his mouth. Like a photograph of him printed at 99% scale on one axis only. I couldn't have told you what specifically had changed. I just knew, the way you know your front door is unlocked before you test the handle. "You okay?" I asked. "Good," he said. "Slept hard." "You went outside around 2. He looked at me. No reaction. "Did I?" "Heard your door. Might have been sleepwalking. Kelly always said I did that when I was stressed." Kelly was his ex-wife. He mentioned her maybe twice a year. The fact that he brought her up voluntarily was almost stranger to me than whatever I thought I'd seen in his face. We worked the Tuesday span. Poles 52 through 58, dead ending at the transformer bank that feeds the elementary school. The cob timber ran parallel to us the entire way. I kept my attention on the work. Phase spacing, conductor tension, the specific feel of a properly torqued bolt on a suspension clamp. But twice I caught Marcus paused in the bucket again, facing the tree line. Once I followed his gaze, and this time I thought I saw something too. Not a person exactly. A density. Like one section of the shadow between the trunks was thicker than the shadows around it. The kind of thing your brain registers and discards in the same instant. At lunch, we sat in the truck with the heater running, eating gas station sandwiches. The rain had started, that fine, persistent Pacific Northwest rain that doesn't fall so much as materialize out of the air. Marcus ate half his sandwich and set the rest on the dash. "You ever meet Dale Purcell?" he asked. I hadn't, but I knew the name. Dale Purcell was a lineman out of the same service center, retired before I transferred in. Dead 3 years before Marcus and I started climbing together. Heart attack in his kitchen. 58 years old. People mentioned him sometimes the way you mention any well-liked guy who died too young. "He worked this corridor," Marcus said, "like 20 years ago. Same poles, same line." "So?" "I keep thinking about him." Marcus unwrapped the rest of his sandwich, looked at it, wrapped it back up. Like not voluntarily. I'll be up in the bucket, and his name just comes into my head. Dale Purcell. Dale Purcell. Like a frequency I can't tune off. I didn't know what to say to that. Marcus wasn't a superstitious person. He was a Catholic who hadn't gone to Mass since his divorce, and his relationship with the unexplained was basically non-existent. He trusted instruments, specifications, physics. The fact that he was telling me this over a wet sandwich in a truck cab felt significant in a way I couldn't articulate. "Stressed about something?" I tried. "No, that's what's weird. I feel fine. Better than fine. Like I'm sleeping better than I have in months. Just the name." Tuesday night. His alarm at 8:45. Door opening at 1:52 a.m. I timed it again. This time I got up. By the time I pulled pants on and opened my own door, the walkway was empty. His truck was still in the lot. I walked to the edge of the gravel where it met the wet grass, and the grass sloped down maybe 30 yards to the tree line. Different section than the work corridor, but the same timber. Cob timber wrapped 3 sides of the town. I stood there in the cold and the dark, and I listened. Rain on leaves. The highway half a mile west. a truck downshifting, and from the tree line, maybe, the sound of someone walking. Rhythmic, steady, boot pace, going deeper, not coming closer. I went back to my room. Wednesday morning, Marcus looked different enough that I stopped pretending I was imagining it. His left eye sat lower, not dramatically, maybe 3 millimeters. But on a face you've studied for 4 years, 3 millimeters is a canyon. The crease lines running from his nose to the corners of his mouth seemed deeper on the right side than the left, where before they'd been roughly symmetrical. His jaw looked heavier. I didn't say anything. What was I supposed to say? Your face is moving? You look like you're turning into someone else? I just watched him, and I worked, and I thought about Dale Purcell. That afternoon, I drove to the Carver Public Library on my lunch break while Marcus stayed at the truck. Told him I needed to look something up. The library was small, one room with fluorescent lights and a carpet that smelled like 1987. The librarian was a woman in her 60s who looked at me like linemen didn't usually visit. Do you have local newspapers archived, like from 5-6 years ago? She pointed me to a microfiche machine that had been replaced by a desktop computer with a digital archive. I typed in Dale Purcell. One obituary from 2019, 58, survived by 2 adult sons, heart attack. Former employee of Pacific Power, 31 years of service. Last assignment, distribution maintenance, Carver Corridor. There was a photo. Standard obituary headshot, probably from his retirement event. I stared at it for a long time. Dale Purcell had a heavy jaw, deep nasolabial folds, asymmetrical, right side deeper than left. His left eye sat slightly lower than his right. Brown eyes. He had a broader face than Marcus, wider cheekbones. Different man. Obviously different man. But the architecture, the spatial relationship between the features, the underlying geometry. I printed the obituary, folded it into my shirt pocket, drove back to the job site. Marcus was in his bucket when I arrived, working the last dead end on pole 58. He didn't have his headset on and didn't notice me for a good 30 seconds. He was staring at the tree line. From 32 feet up in the bucket, he would have been able to see over the first row of trunks, into the canopy shadows. His hands were at his sides. The hot stick lay across the bucket rim, not in use. He wasn't working. He was just looking. I honked. He startled, picked up the hot stick, and went back to the dead-end bolts like nothing had happened. I got out and walked to the base of the pole, looking up. You good up there? Good, his voice came down. Sorry, lost in thought. About Dale Purcell? He paused. I could see his hand stop on the bolt. Then, yeah, how'd you know? You told me yesterday. Did I? He sounded genuinely confused. Huh. He came down 20 minutes later, and I looked at his face in the gray afternoon light. The jawline was heavier. I was sure of it now. Not drastically, not the way a person changes from 20 to 40. More like the way a house settles over decades, except compressed into hours. The bones of his face were rearranging toward a template. Marcus, I said, do me a favor, look at this. I pulled out the printed obituary, unfolded it, held it up. He looked at Dale Purcell's photo, studied it, then looked back at me with an expression I couldn't read. Not confusion, not shock, something more like recognition that hadn't quite reached his conscious mind. Who is that? He said. That's Dale Purcell. He looks. Marcus stopped, touched his own jaw, ran his fingers along the right side of his face, feeling the fold of skin beside his mouth. His hand moved up to his left eye, pressing the orbital bone gently, like testing for swelling. Marcus, do you see what I see? I don't know what you see. You're starting to look like him. He didn't deny it, didn't laugh, didn't tell me I was crazy. He just stood there in the rain and touched his own face and said, 3 nights. What? I keep waking up and going outside, and I've done it 3 nights, including last night, and each time I walk toward those trees, and each time I get a little further in before I turn around. My stomach dropped. You remember going in? Some of it. It's like remembering a dream. I walk in. It's dark. And someone is walking ahead of me. I can hear their boots. And I follow them until something in me says stop. And I stop. And I turn around. And I come back to the room. Who's walking ahead of you? Marcus looked at the obituary in my hand. He didn't answer, but his eyes stayed on the photo. That night, Wednesday night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the hard chair by the window in room 7 with the curtain cracked 1 inch, and I watched the walkway. At 1:38 a.m., Marcus's door opened. He stepped out in his boots and jeans and a thermal undershirt. No jacket. His eyes were open, but his movements had that gliding quality of someone not fully present. He walked off the concrete onto the grass and headed straight for the tree line behind the motel. I was out my door within 5 seconds. I followed, kept 15 feet back. The ground was soaked and my boots sank with each step. Marcus didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge me. He walked with purpose, a steady pace, straight toward the wall of Douglas fir that began at the bottom of the slope. He entered the trees without hesitating. I stopped at the edge. I want to be clear about what I saw and what I didn't. I did not see another figure in the timber. I did not see a light or hear a voice. What I heard was Marcus's footsteps continuing inward on the wet duff, steady, rhythmic. And ahead of his steps, maybe 20 yards deeper, another set of footsteps in the same rhythm. Same pace, same weight, same cadence. Like a man walking in front of a mirror. I went in after him. The canopy blocked what little ambient light there was. Within 10 steps I was navigating by sound and by the feel of my boots on root and needle. Marcus's steps were ahead of me, maybe 20 feet. The other steps were ahead of him. All 3 of us moving at the same pace into the cob timber. I called his name. Marcus. Quiet first, then louder. Marcus. He didn't stop. The steps ahead of him didn't stop. I walked faster, got within arm's reach, grabbed the back of his thermal shirt. He kept walking for 2 steps, pulling against my grip like a man walking into a strong wind, then stopped. His body went rigid, not tense rigid, like a cramp that locks every muscle simultaneously. I held the shirt. The footsteps ahead of us stopped too. And then, in the dark, maybe 15 feet deeper into the timber, I heard breathing. Heavy, wet breathing, like a man who's been running. But the steps had been calm, walking pace. And now this breathing, ragged, close, and wrong in a way I cannot describe except to say it sounded like someone breathing through a mouth that wasn't quite shaped right for the task. Marcus spoke. His voice came out flat, not his own tone. He's showing me where it happened. Where what happened. Where he used to work. The poles ran through here, before they rerouted in 1998. I didn't know if that was true. I didn't care if it was true. I pulled Marcus backward. He resisted for a moment, and then his body unlocked, and he stumbled back into me, and we both nearly went down on the wet ground. The breathing in the dark ahead of us stopped. Not faded. Stopped. Like a recording cut. I got Marcus back to the motel. He sat on the edge of his bed and shook for 20 minutes. Not from cold. Deep shaking, the kind that comes from the core. His teeth chattered. I made coffee from the room's ancient drip machine and made him hold the cup. In the overhead fluorescent light of his motel room, I looked at his face. The migration was worse. The proportions had shifted again. His own features were still there, the scar, the crooked nose bridge, but they were arranged differently now, pulled toward a configuration that I could match to the printout in my pocket. Like someone had taken a transparency of Dale Purcell's bone structure and laid it over Marcus's face and was slowly, methodically, dialing up the opacity. "How do you feel?" I asked. "Tired." He sipped the coffee. His hands were steady now, but his eyes looked wrong. Not the color, the depth. Like he was looking at me from further back inside his own skull. "I feel like I've been walking all night." "You walked maybe 200 yards. "No, inside." I walked for hours. I was following the old pole line. Every pole. 42 of them. He was at every one, showing me where the crossarms were, where the conductors ran, how the load split at the tap. Marcus, that doesn't make sense. I know. He set the coffee down. But I know the line now. I know it like I built it. Pole 1 through 42, original configuration, pre-1998. Three-phase through pole 28, single-phase tap at 29 through 42, feeding the old mill substation. I looked at him. The old mill hasn't had power since 2014. Since 2014, yeah. But the original line went in 1971. Dale worked it from 1988 to his retirement in 2017. 31 years. 29 of them on this corridor. I hadn't told him the years of service from the obituary. I'd shown him the photo, told him the name, but I hadn't read him the details. 31 years of service. And Marcus had just said it back to me. Marcus, I showed you his picture. I didn't tell you how long he worked there. He blinked, that faraway look again. I know that. His hand went to his jaw, ran along the bone. I can feel it changing. Thursday morning, I called our foreman at the service center, Jeff Relling. Told him Marcus was sick, that I needed to pull him off the job for the day. Jeff said fine. Asked if we needed a replacement. I said no. I could handle the last two poles solo if I worked from the ground and called for a hotline crew to energize. But I didn't go to the job site. I went back to the library. The librarian remembered me. I asked if she had records of the old power line routing before 1998. She didn't, but she directed me to the county planning office 2 blocks over. A woman named Donna, with reading glasses on a chain, pulled a plat map from 1972 that showed the original utility easement cutting through what was now the Cobb timber. 42 poles. The route had been decommissioned and rerouted to the current frontage road alignment when the timber company sold the land. Are the old poles still in there? I asked. Donna shrugged. They should have been removed during the reroute, but things get left behind. You know how it is. I knew how it was. I'd found abandoned poles and timber before. Creosote-treated Douglas fir, 40 feet tall, left standing, because nobody wanted to pay for the removal once the conductors were pulled. They just stand there in the trees, slowly rotting, supporting nothing. I drove to the Cobb timber. Parked where the frontage road bent closest to the old easement entry point, I could read it off the plat map. The tree line started 20 feet from the road shoulder. I got out, crossed the ditch, and entered the timber. Within 200 feet, I found the first pole. Still standing, angled about 6 degrees off vertical. Cross arms still bolted to it, but bare. No conductor. Woodpecker holes riddled the upper third. The pole tag, a metal plate at the base, read P1 and a date stamp I couldn't make out through the moss. I followed the old easement line. The clearing had long since grown in, but the pole spacing was obvious once you knew what to look for. Every 120 feet, give or take, another creosote pole emerging from the undergrowth. Some had fallen. Most still stood. At pole 19, I stopped. There was a jacket hung over one of the cross arms. A Carhartt jacket, brown, the duck canvas type. It hung like it had been placed there deliberately, sleeves arranged over the wood. It was not old. The fabric was unfaded. I could see the tag from below, white against the brown collar. I climbed. Not with gear, just free climbing the steps, which were rusted but held my weight. At the cross arm, I pulled the jacket down. Size large. In the breast pocket, a folded piece of paper. I climbed back down and unfolded it. It was a line drawing. Pencil on plain paper. A face. A man's face. Heavy jaw. Deep lines from nose to mouth, asymmetrical. Left eye slightly lower than right. Wide cheekbones. It wasn't signed, wasn't dated. But the resemblance to the obituary photo was unmistakable. And underneath the drawing, in neat block letters, Working Pole 19, June 4th, 2017. Dale Purcell's retirement date, according to the obituary, was June 2017, his last day working the line. I put the drawing in the jacket pocket and took the jacket with me. I walked the rest of the easement, every pole present through 38. After that, 3 had fallen, and I couldn't find 42, the terminal pole. The corridor ended at a concrete pad overgrown with salal, the old mill substation pad. Equipment removed, just the foundation left. I went back to the motel. Marcus was in his room, door unlocked. He was sitting at the small table, writing. When I came in, he looked up, and for one horrible second I thought I was looking at the wrong person. His jaw had thickened overnight. The bone was broader. His left eye socket had migrated down enough that the asymmetry was now obvious to anyone, not just someone who'd memorized his face. The nasolabial folds were deeply grooved on the right side, almost flat on the left. He was becoming Dale Purcell's face. I remember things, Marcus said. Calm, too calm. I remember hanging conductor on a day so cold the wire was brittle. I remember the apprentice who fell from pole 23. I remember the time a branch took out the A phase and we had to refuse the tap in the dark in January. Those aren't your memories. I know. I put the jacket on the table. Marcus looked at it. That's mine, he said. Then, no, it isn't. It's his. But it feels like mine. I found it on pole 19 in the timber, hung on the crossarm. He used to leave his jacket there when it got warm in the afternoons. Pole 19 gets the most sun because of the gap in the canopy. Marcus said this as if reciting fact, as if he'd been there, as if 30 years of another man's life had been downloaded into him like line specifications. We're leaving, I said, right now. I'm calling Jeff, telling him we need to pull off this job. It won't matter. Marcus. I walked 4 hours last night, in there, all the way to the substation pad and back. Every pole. And at every pole he showed me what he knew. How the load balanced. Where the weak points were. Which insulators cracked first in ice storms. Things you can't learn from prints. Things that take decades to know. He's giving you his experience. He's giving me his face. Marcus touched the heavy jaw that wasn't his. I can feel it still moving, right now, under the skin. The bone is warm where it's changing. I sat on the edge of the bed. My partner, my climber, the man I trusted with my life every working day, was losing himself by increments, and he was calm. That was the thing that frightened me more than the shifting bone. He was calm about it, like it was inevitable, like it was welcome. Marcus, do you want this? Long pause. Parts of me do. The parts that aren't mine anymore. They think this is correct. Like I'm being promoted into a role, taking over a route. You're not taking over a route. You're being consumed. Maybe. Or maybe I'm being inherited. He stood up and walked to the window. In profile, the transformation was more apparent. The slope of his forehead had changed. His hairline hadn't moved, but the bone beneath it had, creating a slightly more prominent brow ridge. Dale Purcell worked this corridor for 29 years, his whole adult life, and then he retired and went home and died in his kitchen 8 months later. Heart attack. Yeah, but what if it wasn't just his heart that stopped? What if the work didn't stop? What if the corridor kept needing someone and there was nobody there? I thought about that, about a stretch of line abandoned in the timber, 42 poles holding nothing. A man who had given his life to them, literally, and then finally. And now a new lineman on the same road, the same route, working the modern incarnation of the same corridor. It chose you because you're working the replacement line. It chose me because I was close enough and I fit. Same trade, same voltage. Close enough age, close enough build. He turned back to me, not his face. Dale Purcell's face wearing Marcus Weber's scar. By tomorrow, it'll be done. 4 nights, 3 nights walking in. 4th night, he doesn't let me come back. How do you know that? Because I remember the one before Dale. Guy named Harkin. 1988. Dale got the route, and Harkin went in and didn't come back. Dale told people Harkin retired, but Harkin's down there at pole 42, at the terminal, where the corridor ends. I felt cold in a way that had nothing to do with the room temperature. You're saying Dale consumed Harkin? I'm saying the corridor consumed Harkin through Dale. The corridor needs a man. It's been needing a man. It ran through Dale for 29 years, and when he left, it went hungry. And when he died, it started looking for someone to hold the load again. And the face? The face is the fit. You can't carry a man's root without carrying his dimensions. The bone structure is. It's like a key. It has to match the corridor. That's insane. I know. We sat in silence for a while. Rain hit the window. The motel's neon sign buzzed pink through the curtain. I looked at my partner and tried to find him in the face that was slowly being overwritten, and I could still see him, barely, in the way his shoulders sat, in the way his hands rested on his knees. The body language was still Marcus, but the face was 60% gone. I'm not going to let you go in there tonight, I said. You can't stop it. Watch me. That night, I moved a chair in front of Marcus's door. I sat in it, with my back against the door, in the hallway, legs stretched across the walkway. At 1:30 a.m., I heard him get up, heard his footsteps approach the door from inside. The handle turned. The door pressed against my back. Move, Marcus said. His voice was flat, not his pitch, lower, rougher. A smoker's voice, and Marcus didn't smoke. No, it's cold. I don't care. You can't carry this. It's not your corridor. Marcus, sit down. The pressure on the door stopped. I heard him walk back to the bed. Springs creaked, then silence. I stayed in the chair until 5 a.m., when the sky started to lighten. My back was wrecked. My hips ached from the hard chair, but he hadn't gone out. In the morning, Marcus opened the door, and I nearly fell backward into his room. He looked down at me, and I looked up at him, and the migration had stopped, or at least paused. His face looked the same as the night before, same percentage, same wrong proportions, but not worse. You stopped it, he said. His voice was his own again, still calm but present. The distance behind his eyes had retreated. For one night. One night might be enough. If the pattern needed 4, if I don't complete the walk. You don't know that. I know what I remember. Harkin went 4 nights. Dale went 4 nights in 1988 and came out changed and stayed changed for 29 years until his body gave out. If the 4th night doesn't happen, the transfer doesn't complete. And then what? I don't know. Maybe it fades. Maybe it finds someone else. Maybe it just waits. I thought about the next crew that would come through. The next lineman who'd stand on that frontage road and feel the old corridor pulling from the trees. The next guy who'd hear footsteps and follow them in the dark. We need to take out the poles, I said. Marcus looked at me. All of them. Pole 1 through 42, cut them down, pull the butts, remove the cross arms, burn the whole goddamn easement clear. If the corridor is the infrastructure, we remove the infrastructure. You'd need a crew, equipment, permission from whoever owns the land. I have a chainsaw in my truck. I have 2 days before Jeff expects us back. Marcus's face, the wrong face, the halfway face, split into a smile that was still partly his. You're serious. I'm your climber. I don't leave you on the line. We started at noon on Thursday. I drove my truck as far into the old easement entry as the ground would allow, which was about 60 feet before the undergrowth stopped me. From there, it was chainsaw work. Marcus stayed back at the truck because neither of us wanted him any closer to those poles than necessary. I could see what proximity did. When we'd driven up the road past the work corridor that morning, his jaw had ached, he said. Bone-deep ache. The closer he got to the decommissioned line, the more the face wanted to finish its work. So I went in alone. The first pole went down hard. Old creosote Doug fir, 12 inches at the base, still sound despite the rot in the upper third. My steel 4.62 chewed through it in under a minute. The pole fell into the timber with a sound like a door slamming, and something inside the trees went quiet. A silence that wasn't just absence of sound, but presence of attention. I felt watched. I kept cutting. Pole 2, pole 3, pole 4. Each one I notched and felled, the silence got louder. By pole 7, the hair on my forearms was standing up under my jacket, and the saw felt heavier than it should. By pole 11, I was sweating despite the cold, and the rain had stopped, which never happens in Carver in October. The air hung still and thick, and the shadows between the standing poles ahead of me looked deeper than geometry allowed. At pole 19, where I'd found the jacket, I paused. The crossarm still had the impression where the jacket had hung, 2 slightly worn spots on the wood. I looked up at it, and for 1 second I smelled cigarette smoke. Camels, unfiltered. Nobody was smoking. Nobody was there. I cut the pole down. By 4 p.m., I'd felled 26 poles. My back was in revolt. My hands were cramping around the saw grip, and I was running low on bar oil. I hiked back to the truck. Marcus was sitting on the tailgate, and when he saw me, his face looked better. Not right. Still wrong, still too heavy in the jaw, still asymmetrical in the wrong direction. But better. Like someone had dialed the opacity of the overlay back by 10%. It's working, he said. I can feel it letting go. Each one you drop, it's like pressure releasing. I've got 16 more. Come back tomorrow. You're wrecked. I was. I went back Friday morning at first light. Marcus stayed at the motel. Said the pulling had stopped completely overnight. No sleepwalking, no footsteps, just sleep. Real sleep. The kind he hadn't had since we'd arrived in Carver. I dropped poles 27 through 38 by noon. 3 had already fallen, and I just bucked them into rounds. Then I pushed toward the terminal. Past pole 38, the timber got darker. The canopy was thicker, the undergrowth taller. I had to cut through salal and huckleberry to reach the last section. Pole 39 went down. Pole 40. Pole 41. I couldn't find pole 42. I walked the trajectory, measured the span distance from 41, which should have put me right at the old substation pad. I found the pad, the concrete square under its carpet of moss, but no terminal pole. I walked a circle, widening with each pass. Nothing. 41 poles accounted for. The 42nd was gone. Not fallen, not rotted away. The stump hole would still be visible in the soil. There was no stump hole, no mark in the ground. The terminal pole had never been there, or had been removed so completely and so long ago that the earth had forgotten it. Or it was somewhere else. I stood on the substation pad and looked at the timber around me. 900 acres of second growth. The pole could be anywhere. Could have been moved. Could have walked. I drove back. Marcus was in the parking lot. He was standing beside his truck, looking toward the tree line. But the posture was different now. Tense, alert. Not drawn toward it, bracing against it. His face, in the midday light, was maybe 70% his own again. The jaw was still slightly heavy. The left eye still sat a millimeter low. But the deep folds were smoothing. The brow was flattening back to its normal slope. I can't find pole 42, I told him. I know where it is, he said. I remember. Where? It's not in the timber anymore. It was moved. In 2003. Dale moved it. Moved it where? Marcus pointed. Not at the timber, at the motel. Specifically, at the corner of the building where it joined the hillside, where a retaining wall made of creosote-treated timbers held back the slope. I walked over, looked at the retaining wall. 6 horizontal timbers, each about 14 inches in diameter, stacked and pinned with rebar, covered in moss, blackened by decades of weather and soil contact. The bottom timber was longer than the others. It extended past the corner of the building by about 2 feet on each side. The base of pole 42, Marcus said from behind me. He built it into the motel, into the foundation. He made the corridor touch this place. So even when they decommissioned the line, the terminal was still here. Still here. And anyone staying in these rooms was inside the corridor without knowing it. The line was dead, but the terminal was live. Has been live since 2003, just waiting for someone with the right trade and the right proximity. I looked at the retaining wall, the timber that was pole 42's base, buried in the structure of the Briar Motor Lodge. I thought about every lineman who'd ever stayed here on a job, sleeping 10 feet from the terminal end of a dead man's route. I went to my truck and got the saw. It took 20 minutes. The retaining wall was structural, and when I cut through the base timber, the upper one shifted. Soil started to slide. The motel owner came out yelling, and I didn't stop. I cut that timber into 4 pieces and dragged each piece away from the building and across the parking lot, and I kept going until they were across the road, on the opposite side from the cob timber, sitting in the ditch like discarded railroad ties. Marcus sat down on the curb when the last piece came free. Sat down hard like his strings had been cut. I dropped the saw and went to him. His face was his face. Not all the way. Not yet. But the architecture was Marcus Weber again. The scar in the right place over his right eye. The crooked nose bridge. The spacing between his features restored to the proportions I'd known for 4 years. The jaw was still slightly too heavy. Would be for weeks. But it was his. It's gone, he said. The memories. All of them. The poles, the load calculations, Harkin, all of it. Gone. We left that afternoon. Didn't finish the job. I called Jeff and told him we had a family emergency, both of us, and we needed a different crew to complete the Carver reconductor. He was annoyed, but he didn't push it. I asked him to send a crew from a different service center, one that had never worked that corridor. He asked why, and I told him I'd explain later, knowing I wouldn't. That was 8 months ago. Marcus's face went back to normal for about 3 weeks. The jaw was the last to resolve. He saw a doctor in November, said he was having facial pain. They did imaging, said everything looked fine. No structural abnormalities. Whatever had been moving under his skin had moved back without leaving evidence. We still climbed together. Same truck, same tailboard briefings, same trust. But Marcus won't take a job within 50 miles of Carver. When the rotation comes up, he trades shifts. Nobody questions it. Linemen have their superstitions, their avoided spots. Everyone does. I think about the poles I felled. 41 of them, rotting now in the undergrowth, horizontal instead of vertical, unable to hold anything. I think about the 4 pieces of pole 42 in the ditch across from the Briar Motor Lodge, which I drove past once in January, and they were still there. Nobody had moved them. Nobody had hauled them away. But here's the thing that keeps me up. The thing that I have not told Marcus, because telling him would put him back in the space where the memories lived. In January, when I drove past, the motel had a new retaining wall. Concrete block, modern, professionally built. But behind the motel, past the new wall, the hillside had been regraded. Fresh earth dark against the winter-dead grass. And at the top of the regraded slope, just at the tree line, I could see a vertical shape that could have been a fence post. Could have been a new survey marker. Could have been a pole. I didn't stop. I didn't measure. I didn't go back. And I will not go back. Marcus is himself. His face is his face. He sleeps through the night. But someone will stay at the Briar Motor Lodge again. Some lineman will get the Carver corridor job and check into room 7 or room 8 and set his alarm for 5 a.m. and feel the trees at the edge of the lot pulling at something behind his face. And the corridor will reach for him the way it reached for Marcus, the way it reached for Dale, the way it reached for Harkin. And I cut down 41 poles, but the 42nd keeps coming back.